Hello and welcome to the Watering Hole. Thanks for checking out this clip. Don't forget to like and subscribe because that'll make the baby Jesus cry, and I know how much you guys love making the baby Jesus cry.
All right. Story number one.
Pope Francis is lying about having zero tolerance for sexual abuse. This is the one that I wanted to drop from the lineup because we all know it. Pope Francis.
And I said we should still touch on it, which I now realize isn't an inappropriate pun.
I wish I'd have realized that at the time. Yeah. Yeah. Pope Francis says that we have a zero tolerance policy, but his actions suggest otherwise. When Cardinal Pell was found guilty, his guilty conviction was overturned on like a minor technicality of like the judge didn't think that the jury should have thought the way that they thought. And so
great.
So
what a technicality.
So the judge like overturned it because he thought the juries had a wrong opinion about what counted as reasonable doubt or whatever. And then this Pope Francis, he went and gave a speech and compared Cardinal Pell to Jesus Christ because that's what happens when the innocent are persecuted. It's like, he's guilty though. He was just overturned on technicality. That's like the stupidest technicality.
Go home, Cardinal Pell. We know you're not feeling well. Do you think Pell still has a chance at being the Pope, or do you think that even they know they can't pull it off?
I hadn't even thought about that. I hope not.
He's always been considered a top candidate. But not always, but for the last couple.
Yeah, but also the Catholic Church has always been against any potential legislation that would make priests mandatory reporters, which would mean if someone goes to the confessional booth and says, I sinned, I molested a child, that priest would then have to report that to the authorities, which absolutely they should. But they're like, oh no, that would violate the sanctity of the confessional. It's like, protecting kids is probably more important than the sanctity of the confessional. Like they can confess all the shit they want once they're in prison. So the Catholic Church opposes those laws, and they did issue new rules a while ago, where priests would be required to report abuse allegations to church authorities. But there were a bunch of loopholes in those. Like for one, it's church authorities. It's not the authorities. It's the church who is just going to bury it. There's no penalty for priests who are found to have not reported to the church authorities. So if they don't follow those guidelines, nothing happens to them. And admissions during confession were still considered sacred and private. So they still didn't have to report those, not even to the church authorities.
To say there's a zero tolerance policy would imply that like there are no people who in the past were just shuffled around that have now been given to the authorities. That hasn't happened.
He has in his possession full lists of priests that have allegations against them. If they have zero tolerance, all those priests should at the very least be put on leave until an investigation by the actual authorities can be conducted. And and every time the church hands over a list to the authorities of like, oh, these are the people that we know of that have allegations against them, every single time that list always suspiciously ends right when the statute of limitation expires. Or like, it begins that like they don't have any lists that the allegation happened early enough or recent enough for the statute of limitations to have not made it impossible to investigate and press charges.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the first story in a nutshell. They got a lot of work to do if they want us to actually believe that they have a zero tolerance policy.
Right. And people always want to give them the points for like, oh, he said that, there's he actually didn't directly say the atheist was in heaven, but he comforted a kid who was worried their atheist father was in hell. And he said we should be compassionate to gay people and we should be compassionate to people who've had abortions, but hasn't changed any of the policies on those. They're still considered grave sins. You still can't operate with full membership, I guess would be the way. That's what we would call it in Mormonism, but you're still tainted if you do any of those things. They're not welcoming of any of those. And so like the people are their expectations, they act like somebody's a progressive for being less of a bigot
Yeah.
than another bigot.
Yeah.
Like fucking, oh my God.
It's ridiculous.
It's
Like
blowing my mind right now.
He hasn't done anything to warrant considering him the good pope. He is just
Right.
less bad than previous popes, but he's still bad.
Right.
Like,
Right. Right. Meanwhile, if anybody's watched The New Pope, the opening scene of The New Pope is Jude Law as the Pope giving a speech where he's basically saying like, have sex, be gay, all this stuff. And then he wakes up and he was dreaming that he was doing that. And he's like, I can't believe I was saying such nonsense, because he's actually incredibly pious and horrible.
I would love it if like the next pope were to come out and first thing is do is to speak ex cathedra and say,
Yeah.
everybody, like, if you want to make it into heaven, you have to have gay sex at least once in your life.
It's going to be another Italian, I'm sure. Or, I mean, this Pope they pulled from Argentina, but you wouldn't really call him Argentinian. But anyway, it'll be, we'll just go with another Italian and it'll be like, welcome, my children. The new Catholic Church it's going to be a revolution. Please let me direct you to my OnlyFans page. The new Pope. The next Pope's going to have an OnlyFans, and that'll fix everything.
Only popes?
Cardinal, I barely know her. That doesn't work, sir. That doesn't. What are you saying?